the number of times a story gets told can be a serious liability. And that's true on both sides, right? It's true in litigation with the government's witnesses. It's true when you have your defendant, when you have your client who's getting interviewed multiple times. There is so much crime out there. You don't have to bend over backwards to hammer somebody who made an honest mistake. There are plenty of folks out there who are doing this as a job.
Who are taking jackhammers to cars and video.
Right? So, I mean, the recurrence late model, they probably already know where you were when this happened, right? Like, if they have...
So you're saying, like, by the computer in the car?
One of the things that is advertised to me was, if you'd like to lower your insurance payments, you can link your phone with one of our apps to the
like
car.
Like the good driver thing or whatever, yeah.
And now, if you do that, in the reams of agreements, terms and conditions, the adhesion contract that you sign every 6 minutes in your life, you're going to basically say, yeah, they can access my car's onboard computer at will. And now, if you tell them, oh, I was hit in a Stop and Shop parking lot, they're going to be like, it doesn't look that way. And now...
Welcome to episode 10. We're in double digits now of the Boston Barristers podcast. I've got Chris here along with me. I'm Matthew. Chris is going to talk about another in our series of white-collar criminal defense. This one is about fraud. Whenever I think about fraud, I think about that old Discover commercial where they say, the whole bit is that one of them says fraud protection and the other one mishears it as frog protection. And like, it's like the dumbest commercial I've ever seen because it's like, what's the joke here? Why is that funny? But for some reason, it stuck with me, and I remember that it was Discover, so I guess it's an effective ad. But what does that have to do with fraud, Chris?
Fraud. Well, you're going to need frog protection if you have fraud. No, I have no idea how to make that a jumping off point for a serious discussion about something as serious as fraud, Matthew. But I appreciate you bringing a note of levity to it. Thanks for having me on the podcast. You know, fraud is an interesting subject, I think, for me, obviously, because I was a white collar prosecutor for a number of years, and I prosecuted a fair bit of fraud, and it comes in a lot of different forms. You know, as a good starting off point, there really isn't, as far as I know, there is no statute that says fraud. Like, you've done a fraud, go to jail, what have you. There's always some component. You know, there's a way that you've committed fraud against usually a particular industry or something. But the way that people could understand fraud, I think most easily, is that it involves dishonesty, usually in like a semi-official setting. Anybody gets ahead of me, it can be lying or misrepresentations or omissions. That's usually written into most of the statutes.
So is lying, omissions, that's the general definition of fraud?
I think it's sort of colloquially the way I would say the way that fraud happens is somebody misrepresents something or they fail to disclose something. And they do this in order to obtain some benefit. Usually it's going to be money, but it could also be goods or services, I think, conceivably. But then kind of taking it from that point, when prosecuting these things, you typically would see people tie fraud to larceny. Right? So if you commit fraud against your insurance company, your car insurer, you're going to get charged with motor vehicle insurance fraud, but also the according larceny amount. Like, how much money did you get out of this? Because while you can commit fraud for a de minimis amount of gain, it's sort of stupid, right? Like, it will affect whether a jury thinks that you did it, right? Like, why would I lie about something if I didn't gain anything by it? Like, what would be right? If I lied to my insurance company and got nothing, then why is that a crime?
So let's say I told you, Chris, remember last night I gave you $5. You said you'd give me $5 today. And then that never happened. But you didn't remember. I was very convincing, as I often am. And you gave me $5. So would that be fraud?
Larceny by embezzlement is what that is. What? Because... yeah, I know. And I mean, look, it's the reason that would be I see where you're coming from, right? That involves some dishonesty. I'll give you a more concrete form of what fraud looks like. But the reason that that's embezzlement is because you came into that money. You didn't steal it from me, right? You didn't like take it out of my pocket when I wasn't looking. I gave it to you, right? I gave you that money because you're a very convincing person. And then you converted it. Now, There's a world where that gets more complicated and turns into fraud, but typically conversion of something you came into honestly is going to be more readily chargeable as embezzlement than as fraud. But maybe an easier way to understand fraud, people have probably dealt with this a lot in their lives. You fill out forms for insurance. We have compulsory insurance for motor vehicles in Massachusetts, so folks are probably familiar with, you fill out the forms. I mean, I just did this recently, and it's for what I had to sign off. How many miles do you think you're going to put on this car? I'm in a year. Like, I got to estimate that. And if I were to say, like, well, this is my only drive it on Sundays car, I'm probably only going to put like 100 miles because I just like to do a lap around my block to show everyone my nice car. And it turns out I drive that thing like 150 miles a day. The insurance company is going to charge me more for insurance if they know I'm going to be driving it more, because then they are exposed to greater risk, right? So if I lie to them about how much I'm going to drive that car because I know it's going to raise my insurance premiums if I'm honest with them, that is, in essence, insurance fraud, because it's lowering my premium through dishonesty. Now, that example would be insanely hard to prove for a prosecutor. But, I mean, it is still essentially fraud. You're misrepresenting something in this official capacity in order to pay less money. The way a prosecutor will do this, for the handful of them who still exist in Mass and do this work, you will calculate the difference in the premium. So a car you never drive, maybe if it costs $100 a month to insure because it's a nice enough car, versus a car you drive all the time and that premium is $300 a month. That's $200 a month, 12 months in a year. Boom. Now you're at felony, larceny, and fraud. Motor vehicle insurance fraud. So I know it sounds crazy, but that's, one way it can happen.
If you're facing legal trouble in Massachusetts, whether it's an OUI, firearms charges, or even just a clerk magistrate's hearing, the stakes are high. This is not the time to go it alone. You need a lawyer. But more than that, you need a legal team that knows how to fight and knows how to win. That's why people across Massachusetts are turning to the law offices of Matthew W. Peterson. With over a dozen years of experience in criminal law, both on the defense and prosecution side, we've got the track record and the passion to defend your rights. If you've lost your firearms license, or you're dealing with family law or immigration issues, we've successfully helped clients and represented them in some of the most difficult situations out there. From first-time offenses to serious felony charges, we've helped people protect their record, protect their families, and protect their freedom. So don't wait until it's too late. Visit mwpetersonlaw.com to schedule a consultation or call 617-295-7500. That's mwpetersonlaw.com, 617-295-7500. Because when your future's on the line, you deserve a legal team that's all in. Stay informed, stay legal.
So in that case that example I gave you, which I know is not realistic, but that if I got that $5 from you, I could be charged with fraud for lying to you and larceny for taking your $5.
So I would say no, because, like I said at the start, there's no crime that's just fraud. You did a fraud. There has to be some form of fraud. Motor vehicle insurance fraud, standard insurance fraud, healthcare fraud, right? There's usually going to be some larger system in which you are perpetrating this fraud. Because just lying to me about giving me my money back and then keeping my money, that's not really, there may be a way that it could be charged as fraud, but there isn't like a fraud charge, right? Not like just,
so there's fraud isn't one of those common law crimes, there are actually common law crimes in Massachusetts. And I've had a couple that I've defended, but it's not a common law crime. There are specific statutory fraud crimes.
I'm not sure that we have a base common law fraud in Mass. The only ones I ever worked in when I was a prosecutor was motor vehicle insurance fraud, insurance fraud. I can give you other examples that would strike people as probably kind of alarming that it can be considered criminal fraud. They're crazy hard to prove. If a person's out on disability, right, you have to go out of work on disability, and they send a private investigator to your house, and they sit across the street with a camera, and they see you doing, deadlifting 300 pounds in your driveway when you're supposed to be out with a back injury. You have told them you were injured so that you wouldn't have to work and you would still receive benefits. That's fraud. That's going to be and it really is going to be whether or not it's charged. That is, in the cases that I handled like that I investigated, that's a generic, I think it's 175H healthcare fraud, which we're going to show you is a crazy statute. It is, we'll flash it up on the screen here. It's just a big undifferentiated paragraph. It's a total mess. You have to you literally basically need a law degree in order to parse the thing and go through it and figure out what's prohibited.
Massachusetts statutes are the worst written in the country. I'm convinced
They're
of
pretty
that.
wild. And, the title of this one that I'm talking about, when we're talking about it in this context, and I'm kind of moving around a lot, but when we're talking about the context of like the healthcare one, false statements on applications for coverage and claims, failure to disclose. And so when you make a false statement representation of a fact in an application for a healthcare benefit, right? And it's like, and there's even more to it than that. It just keeps going. But the idea is they're trying to capture the entirety of human behavior that could be dishonest when you're trying to get healthcare benefits you might not be entitled to, like disability, basically. So that stuff's normally pursued civilly because it's super hard to prove criminally. I know I've tried, but it's fraud. It's a type of fraud.
So basically, fraud, am I understanding right? It's lying to get a benefit. Lying or lying by omission.
That's, I think, probably the simplest way to understand it.
So that's the simple. You gotta simplify it for me, Chris.
I'm doing my level best out here. I'm a practitioner myself, so I'm still learning. I'm no master of this stuff, but having investigated it a number of different ways, indicted on it, presents to a grand jury, indict, litigate. I'm probably more familiar with it than most. And so what I can tell you is it's difficult. It's tricky. You get things like identity fraud, right? I mean, that's just another type of fraud, but you can kind of intuit what that means, right? Identity fraud, you're being dishonest about who you are. And why are you doing that, right? Well, you're doing it because you want to pretend to be another person so you can use their credit card. You can, take their money out of their bank account.
Yeah, I've actually had some of those cases, and it's very strange. But let's talk about, maybe it might be useful for us to pick a specific type of fraud to really analyze this in. So insurance fraud, you mentioned that might be a good way for us to kind of look at this and figure out what fraud is. Insurance fraud, is that a good way to look at it? Or is that a good kind of
and I don't want to make
it.
I do, and I think it's a great jumping off point, and not to make it more complicated than it needs to be, but one way to understand this is that the way that the law prescribes this behavior, I already mentioned the mileage thing is kind of just a one-off. That's a fraud on your application, right? Because when you apply for the insurance, you're lying to them about how much you drive the car because you want the benefit or the.
So, or if I say, hey, I want to insure this Maserati that I have in the driveway, and then suddenly the next day it disappears.
And I will tell you is a case. These cases are everywhere, so I don't think I'm giving anything away. A thing that is popular is to insure a wreck at full value, and then
so like a wrecked car.
There's a whole industry for this, and if you can get it by the RMV, who are overworked public servants, but if you could get them to miss or overlook the fact that you say, listen, I got a $150,000 car in my driveway and I'd like to insure it, and they say, okay, cool, that's going to cost you a lot of money, and you're like, I'm okay with that, I have a really nice car and I want it to be insured well. And then you just kind of push it into the street and you take a picture of it. You go, my car is wrecked. I need $150,000, please. That happens. That is a thing that happens kind of a lot, frankly. You could see all the things I talked about so far, right? Where there's dishonesty. You told them this car was worth a ton of money, and then they insured it for a ton of money, but it really wasn't worth that. You didn't pay $150,000 for this car. You paid like $500 for this car, this hunk of metal. And then when you told them it got totaled, I don't know how, they're going to cut you a check to replace that car, which is going to cost a lot of money, right? That's one way you can do fraud in that case in the application.
So
the other half of it, though. Go ahead. No, respond.
So that's half of it is in an application, you lie about what you're insuring, right? Or lie about its condition. I'm sure there are a bunch of questions in the application that say, hey, this car isn't just a hunk of metal, right?
There are so many ways they've tried to catch people. It's a cat and mouse game, right? Like they always try to make a piece of legislation to sort of seal up the fact that folks have found a wrinkle. So
right. So what about like a situation where I crash my car in my driveway, like I run into a post in my driveway, and then I decide I want my insurance to cover this, and I don't want to put in my home insurance, or for whatever reason, maybe the premium is higher, or maybe the deductible is higher, whatever that is. So I say, hey, I was in the parking lot of the Stop and Shop, and somebody hit me and ran away. Would that be insurance fraud?
Absolutely, because one of the questions they're invariably going to ask you is, who else was involved in this accident? Because they want to know if they can, think about the term here, subordinate.
Subrogate. Bill is actually an expert in subrogation.
Is he really? I had to research subrogation at one point for a case I was prosecuting, which amazingly reached my desk, and I looked at it for like a couple of hours, and I was like, I don't even think there's a crime here. Like this is just the insurance business, which you could get on your soapbox about that later. But yeah, I mean, where they're going to ask you, was anybody else involved in this crash? Because if they were, we're going to try and subrogate their insurance, make them pay for it because they hit your car. And you say, oh no, it was a hit and run. I couldn't get their plates. I don't even, I have bad memory. I don't remember what the car looked like. You've now lied to them, so you don't have to pay whatever the cost would be if they were to say, well, look, you drove into a post in your driveway. Like this accident's your fault. You don't have insurance that covers you being kind of a knucklehead. So you have to pay for it. You don't want to do that. So you tell them somebody else did it. And that's, going to be another type of fraud.
So if I do that, then what is that? A misdemeanor? Am I going to jail for that?
That's going to be felony fraud, more like as not. And it's more to the point with how expensive cars are these days. You're going to get strapped with felony larceny for the amount of money that you walked away with. Which again, over $1,200. Seems like a weirdly low figure for a felony these days, but that's a different conversation for different.
So
time.
I could be facing 2 felonies for that situation where I backed into a post in my driveway.
Yeah. And, not to give away anything about the investigative details of these things, but people in the insurance industry will know this. They record every phone call you make to them to report the accident, and they will send out investigators if they think the claim looks suspicious. And if there is a suspicion of fraud, they will send it to the Insurance Fraud Bureau, people I worked with a lot when I worked at the AG's office. Because the Insurance Fraud Bureau has its own dedicated battery of investigators who will do more advanced investigation, and they have a lot of law enforcement tools, a kind of a quasi law enforcement entity, and they will do staffed with some fairly talented investigators in some circumstances who are former law enforcement, federal law enforcement, and they will do the investigation on their part. It might be interviewing you, it might be interviewing your mechanic. It gets pretty involved pretty quickly.
Sounds like there's some insurance fraud potentially going on outside of the office there.
Oh, you can hear that? No, I think that's just somebody trying to break into my fancy car that I drive 100 miles a year on. So, yeah, I mean, it's one of these things where I feel like when I prosecuted it, and now I can see it from a different angle as a defense attorney, but a person's going to think is this illegal? Right? I mean, I'm fudging the truth a little bit, but is it illegal? And I think there's a sliding scale, right? So when you get a car and your insurance company says, hey, does that car have a low jack in it? You go, I don't know, probably. It's a late model car. And it doesn't? Did you just commit insurance fraud? I mean, maybe in that case, if you didn't know, but you told them affirmatively that it did. But then, again, for a prosecutor, they're going to have to prove that you did this to get a material benefit, right? That you were like, I know exactly how much this is going to shave off. And so there's a practical reality where it doesn't make sense to chase people down for nonsense. But if there's persistent nonsense, or if for some reason you do this kind of a lot, I took a case to trial at one point over an issue where a person was insuring luxury vehicles in the names of family members. Frankly, he was hiding the assets from creditors. But in one case, he insured the vehicle in the name of his father, who had passed away. And so there was a claim that, the way it had been indicted, this wasn't my case that I investigated or indicted, but the claim was look, fundamentally he did this to hide the asset from a creditor, but in so doing, he lied. He said, my dad drives this car. It's like, your dad died a year and a half ago. Your dad doesn't drive this car. And he got a senior citizen discount, as crazy as that sounds, which amounted to a felony amount of larceny.
Wow.
And motor vehicle insurance fraud in the application. Now, you want to talk about how that looks at trial? It's a nightmare. It's extremely hard to prove, and it's not, you got a judge who's got a couple of murder cases in her docket, and she's like, what on earth are we doing here?
I think I know that judge.
I think you maybe do too. But this is just the way these things go sometimes. And I think it's just worth understanding that there is a dedicated, I worked in the insurance fraud bureau at the AG's office. There is a group of prosecutors whose responsibility it is to field referrals from the Insurance Fraud Bureau and investigate them and potentially bring them to a grand jury. And these are paper cases, but they can be very hard to prove. But insurance fraud's a big one because, and this is, I think, something that you would wanted to talk about, who's the victim here, right? Who cares?
The insurance
it's
company.
an insurance company, right? I mean, and like, insurance companies are as popular, they're slightly more popular than Congress people, and like, I don't know, slightly less popular than venereal disease or something like that. It's like
They've got to be less popular than criminal defense attorneys, right?
I don't know. I always thought you told me I was joining the good guys when I changed sides. So far, I've yet to get any parades or laurels in my honor, but I'm doing my best out here. It's the line that you get, and I mean, you could read this off of the government's own website. Here, I'm looking at this, mass.gov, Office of Consumer Affairs and Business Regulation, Accidents, Claims, and Fraud. Everyone pays for insurance fraud. Auto insurance fraud is not a victimless crime. We can all do our part to hold down costs by reporting suspected fraud and being part of the solution. Yeah, you gotta love this. Insurance fraud is a crime punishable by up to 5 years in state prison and a $10,000 crime.
5 years in state prison. I mean, not to mention that like any sort of fraud case is going to be a death knell for any immigrant. Anybody with a
crime
green
moral
card.
turpitude. Yeah.
Yeah,
Sure.
I mean, it's not only crime involving moral turpitude; it could be considered an aggravated felony. Like, but so let's motor. So we talked about insurance fraud. What about motor vehicle insurance fraud? Is there a specific statute involving that?
Is a specific statute, and we can flash to it so you can get a sense for how insane it looks. It's I'll give it to you real quick, Matthew, just so you can. Yeah, you're going to need to finish that drink. It's like, so this is Section 111B, and frankly, for that trial I was talking about, the judge had never seen the charge before. This is a Superior Court judge with like decades of experience in criminal law, like very well respected. Asked me to put together, or asked us as parties to put together jury instructions because they were like, what even is, like, what are the elements in this thing? And like that's the thing I had to do in as part of that trial. But it's huge because, again, I think what you have to understand is that this is the insurance companies and the legislators they work with. I think this was more of an issue in the 90s. They're trying to capture a certain sort of behavior that is like a cottage industry, right? Like this is just a thing that folks will do sometimes, is they will. One big nexus point for this crime is mechanic shops, right? Because if the one thing that we saw happen with some regularity, it was certain folks, car goes to, you get rear-ended, right? And you take your car to the mechanic, and there's more detail in how this works for exactly this reason, this fraud. But your mechanic says, well, yeah, I mean, it looks like it's probably about $1,000 of damage. It's a nice bumper, and it looks like I'm going to have to replace the bumper. And then you get a call, and they're like, there's a supplemental damage report. Like, why? And they're like, oh, well, we took the bumper off, and it looked like someone took a jackhammer to the back half of your car. You're like, because I kind of just got, like, tapped at an intersection. Like, I don't know what you want me to tell you. Look, I'll send you pictures. And there was a case that my criminal bureau chief had tried, or I think may have worked out a plea on several years ago, where there was high definition video of the owner of the chop shop basically smashing up cars that he was supposed to repair because he knew that the insurance companies weren't paying enough attention, that he could bill them for the supplemental damage that he did to the car, and then he would bill them for him to fix it. And this just became, I mean, this is just a thing that happens. It's crazy. And the sad story you get out of these things is that the people whose cars are being like smashed to pieces don't have a car for a while because now it needs way more work. So in that sense, I mean, but that's again another type of motor vehicle insurance fraud because there is $1,000 of damage to this car until someone purposely does more damage and then files a claim for the advanced damage. They call it enhanced damage, actually. So that's a kind of a war story, I guess, because I investigated a number of those instances at like a bunch of different body shops. So again,
I'm sorry,
misrepresentation.
how dumb do you have to be to do that and not turn off your security cameras?
That's a question for the defendant in that case, I suppose, or his lawyers. That was a pretty interesting set of facts, that case, to be sure. But these cases are hard to prove, and it involves experts. You get experts who do damage reconstruction, and they'll say, yeah, I mean, I can tell that this car was rear-ended about 6 months ago, and then about 3 months ago, somebody went crazy on the inside of this car. And they could try to tell you, all right, look, if the initial accident was you backed into a post in your driveway, a bunch of this damage did not come from that. I mean, I feel like we're kind of far afield, but this is the kind of different tendrils of fraud that you get, especially in motor vehicle insurance.
So what about healthcare fraud? Can you elaborate on how expansive healthcare fraud is?
Yeah, so healthcare fraud, I mean, the statute itself is really wild because you can see the way that it's the legislature trying to criminalize anybody who might remotely be involved in this. And that's going to be and I already talked about somebody who maybe is faking an injury and because they want, certain disability benefits or something like that, to which they may not be entitled. But there's also going to be overbilling. I mean, fraud, waste, and abuse in the billing for services is huge. I mean, I've investigated cases where, again, this is just one example, the person providing the service, let's say it was I don't want to say exactly what it was, but let's say that they're providing an insurable healthcare service 45 minutes at a time. A person will get booked for an hour. They'll come in. I don't know. Yeah, I mean, it's in that zone. It's insurable under certain circumstances. A person would come in, they get 45 minutes of health care, they'd leave, and then the insurance company would get billed for 3 hours, right? I mean, that's not by the person the people who got the health care have no idea this is happening, right? But the provider is padding their billing. And you get cartoonish things like a person billing like 30 hours in a sitting or in a day because they're they do 8 hours of real work, but they bill it at 3x and now you're at 24 hours or something like that. So the way that those cases get proven is excruciating because you got to talk to all the people. How long were you with this? I never saw them for more than an hour. Never saw them for more than an hour. People getting care, people providing care, anybody in the chain of statements made from the point of I'm in pain or I need service all the way to someone who hits submit on the billing. Anybody involved in that chain, and you could see how in that example I just gave, the person who actually got healthcare did nothing wrong, right? Yeah. It only starts, they represented that they needed healthcare and they were being honest and they got healthcare and they did, because they're not telling their insurance company, you got to pay this person $300, for 3 hours of their time. So that's another way. You can have it be committed by the recipient of healthcare. You can have it be committed by the person providing healthcare. But really, the way that the law criminalizes it, just to read it to you, is false statements on applications for coverage and claims failure to disclose. And what you may be picking up on when you listen to that is the same thing I talked about with motor vehicle, right? You can do it by application or by claim.
So you prosecute a lot of these cases and you have a lot of experience prosecuting these cases. So now that you're on the good guys, how does that experience help you defend these cases?
So I think probably the best thing I learned is exactly how hard it is to prove these kinds of cases, because it can seem really intimidating when you get notification that you signed this form and we know that this isn't true. And so now you're guilty of fraud, right? And that can look like, all right, well, case is open and shut. And it can look that way to an investigator. When you get it to a prosecutor who's had to bring these cases in front of a grand jury or who has had to prepare them for trial or even try them, the facts on the ground get way different when you have to walk them into a courtroom and try to explain them to a jury of 6 or 12 people. And so where I know how hard it is to make some of the concrete proofs on these cases, I think where the cases can be exploited for defense purposes, but also where they can get it wrong. Right? I mean, that's the thing. That's the dread, is that a person who genuinely didn't do anything wrong is getting railroaded by this system because the insurance companies are sick of having this happen and they fund. This is a whole different conversation. I know that one of your favorite topics is that the Insurance Fraud Bureau and the insurance fraud attorneys general, like the people I worked with. I mean, really what happened was that there was a rash of this stuff in the 90s for motor vehicle fraud, and the AG's office just couldn't handle, there were no prosecutors enough to handle the volume of fraud. And so somebody was like, why don't we just make the insurance companies pay for it? Like, if they're so mad about getting ripped off, and it got worked out so that the insurance companies pay for some amount of the investigation and prosecution of these cases. And it has been litigated as to whether or not that's a conflict of interest.
I mean, why don't they, we'll get into this later, but why don't they go to civil court like the rest of us? Like, why? I mean, Anyway, but let's. So
because it's a crime.
well, because it's a crime because it's. But anyway, that's.
I know.
We'll talk about that in a minute, but I want to talk to you about. So let's say I came to you with my story earlier. Like I backed into a pole in my driveway. I was low on cash. I wanted to fix my car. So I made up this story about getting hit and Stop and Shop. How would you analyze that case when I came in and was sitting right across from you in the desk you're sitting in right now and said that story? How would you begin to defend that case?
So the first thing you're going to want to know, right, where I talked about how fraud is an omission or a misrepresentation. Where did that happen? To whom? Who did you talk to? Because if all you did was submit a form, it's going to be a lot easier to kind of, like if you filled something out, accident X, Y, and Z, and that's it, it's a lot easier to control than, well, I made a couple phone calls, I did submit all these forms. I mean, one of the things that can be a killer is, are your stories inconsistent, right? Because if you call, oh, I've been in an accident, you call your insurance company, I've been in an accident, I'd like to initiate a claim, I'm at the end of my street and somebody hit me and they ran. And then when you're filling it out, you're in a different place. Now that inconsistent statement's going to be used against you. And so this is true, I think you would know from any criminal practice, the number of times a story gets told can be a serious liability. And that's true on both sides, right? It's true in litigation with the government's witnesses. It's true when you have your defendant, when you have your client who's getting interviewed multiple times. Like that a lot of times the law enforcement's just looking for you to make a mistake and then tell a different story because then they know.
Yeah, so I've always noticed that whenever I file an insurance claim, I get the same questions over and over again.
Yep.
So that's why.
They're trying to make you double down, right? Because then you're committing to it. It's probably one, to see if you're going to change your story at all, but two, you've now committed to it a couple of different times in a couple of different ways. The other thing I'm going to want to know from the client, if they come to me and they say, look, this is what happened, is I'm going to say, all right, well, how are they going to prove that? For example, is your car late model? Because if your car is late model, they probably already know where you were when this happened, right? Like if they have.
So you're saying like by the computer in the car?
So there is, and because I told you earlier that I just recently had to insure a different car. One of the things that is advertised to me was, if you'd like to lower your insurance payments, you can link your phone with one of our apps to the
like
car.
Like the Good Driver thing or whatever. Yeah.
And now if you do that, in the reams of agreements, terms and conditions, the adhesion contract that you sign every 6 minutes in your life, you're going to basically say, yeah, they can access my car's onboard computer at will, my insurance company. And now if you tell them, oh, I was hit in a Stop and Shop parking lot, they're going to be like, doesn't look that way, and now but if it's an old car and there's none of that, there's no low jack, there's no GPS, there's no safe driver linkage to your phone, we have a different story, right? Because these are going to be fact-driven inquiries. So I'm going to want to know, where is the misrepresentation? Where has it been made? How many times has it been made? And then if I were investigating it, how would I prove it? You say you got hit in a Stop and Shop parking lot. I wonder if they have surveillance cameras. Is there a bank across from that Stop and Shop? Because it's really a very light lift for the investigators to pull that information.
So let's say I did that, right? So let's say that I made up this Stop and Shop story. Would I know immediately that I'm getting prosecuted, or would the insurance company pay it out to me? And then I know we talked before about there could be months of investigation that I have no idea about until one day I get something in the mail or one day I get a knock on the door. Is the same true here?
I've seen it in both. I've seen it happen in both ways. So I prosecuted a case ages ago where a fella just went off the road into a ditch and totaled his car. And we haven't even talked about this sort of flavor of fraud. His insurance had just lapsed. And then he totaled his car. And then he got his he reactivated his insurance and then filed a claim.
Huh.
And it was like, he said, oh, I got in an accident today. And they were like, really? Because you called the police helped you pull you out of that ditch like a week and a half ago when you didn't have insurance. They didn't pay because they basically, insurance companies have seen this happen hundreds of thousands of times. So if you file a claim within a certain time frame after you activate a policy, they automatically assume it's fraud and they will investigate it. And in this case, they didn't pay. They didn't pay out, and they investigated, and they got the guy kind of dead to rights, because in that case, you asked me how you prove these sorts of things. If there's a police report that says we pulled your busted car out of a ditch on, December 5th, and you got your insurance activated on December 20th and filed a claim for December 21st, it's one example of how you know from the start that you're probably in some trouble. But then there's a second example, which was probably more of what I did, where we have a grand jury investigation running for maybe a year, maybe longer. And this is probably not going to be the example you talked about, right? If it's such a minor thing, it's not going to take that long to investigate. It's not going to take that long to put in front of a grand jury. But however long it takes the Insurance Fraud Bureau to get to your case, however long it takes the prosecutor to get around to your case, there's a 6-year statute of limitations on this. You might have no idea that you're swinging in the breeze, and it could just be that you get a summons. And typically, I think, this is obviously not, I can't guarantee anything. Generally, you don't go for an indictment warrant unless you have cause to think that a person is going to flee or that there might be violence. I think usually it's more, that would never occur really in the fraud context. But if you had cause to believe a person would flee prosecution, you could make a pitch to a court to get an indictment warrant. So you'd indict somebody and then get a warrant for their arrest and have them arrested and brought in. Otherwise, you're going to get a summons. He's going to get a thing that says, hey, you've been indicted for insurance fraud. You're due in court in a month. And in that case, you just got to call an attorney. I mean, these things are complicated enough for people who are routinely versed in them. Let me say this. I wouldn't represent myself. Insurance fraud. It'd probably make you do it unless you're conflicted out.
And if you have a superior court judge who was a criminal defense attorney for decades who doesn't even know this stuff, you got to pick the right attorney.
You do. And I mean, there are vanishingly few of us. It's complicated. It's not as common as a lot of other fraud. And the reason it's not as common is really, this is what I think anyway, from having worked in it for a number of years, is because it's so hard to investigate and it's so resource intensive. There aren't a lot of prosecutors who do it. And therefore, there aren't a lot of people who get charged with it. And therefore, there aren't a lot of defense attorneys who are familiar with it. So it could be possible that your best bet is to get a prosecutor who handled this at volume, because it was his only, I did other white collar work, money laundering and embezzlement and stuff like that. But I probably have more exposure to fraud than most defense attorneys, because you really wouldn't be able to make a living specializing in just insurance fraud necessarily as a defense attorney. So,
Yeah. And that's one
stuff,
thing that's impressive about talking with you about these cases is that, we'll talk about a case and we'll be like, oh man, this is kind of open and shut. And then you'll dive into the discovery and you're like, well, hold on. How are they going to prove this? How are they going to prove that? How are they going to prove this? And I feel like a lot of defense attorneys, when they see this, and it's not, a lot of us, we see street crime. It's like, all right, guy with gun holds up the Stop and Shop. There's a video of it, is there an identification issue? Is there a suppression issue? Is all of those things. But when you say insurance fraud and you meet a prosecutor in arraignment who says, hey, can you drop a hard drive off at my office? Because I have several terabytes of discovery for you. You just start to say, what are you looking for in this case?
There's also a specialization issue with if you haven't read insurance case files, you are going to be bored. You're going to be bored to tears trying to figure out how to go through that nonsense. Whereas I know there are certain things I'm going straight to. If there are agent notes, if I don't have the agent notes, I kind of want them. I want to see what the people, that's another piece of it, which I think you probably are acutely aware of in your practice, is if there are things that are available, but you haven't been given, you're like, why don't I have this? I'd like to have this, please, because this is a crucial, if I get this and it's not it doesn't line up with your case, I'm going to blow a hole wide open, and then your prosecution is going to fall apart. So that's sort of what I meant earlier about knowing where the weaknesses are. It's if you didn't check every box when you were investigating this, I'm going to find out, right? Because I know where to look. I know what rocks to look under. So
so I might not even know, if I got one of these things and, hey, there's a terabyte hard drive and I've got 1,500 hours of video and I've got this insurance paperwork. I may not know that there's such a thing as agent notes, right? I don't know to ask for that. And the DA may not know to ask for that either. So the fact that you have been on the other side of this, I think, is invaluable for people to see that there are things that a regular, I say regular, but it takes a specialization to get there, to know what you're looking at and know what to look for.
Yeah, it's an uncommon specialization for sure. And I think that it's, you can tell it's kind of a running joke at the firm that I get like kind of worked up over this stuff because it's interesting to me. I mean, the thing about fraud that I'm sure people who've paid attention for the time that we've been talking about this is it's abstract, right? It involves dishonesty in paperwork or over the phone or omissions and misrepresentations and stuff like that. It's weird. It's weird. And it's not a smash and grab. Right? It's not a random act of violence.
And you think that how people, like regular people, get caught up in this, where they're like, I get rear-ended, and then I think, you know what? I hit something with my mirror a couple of months ago. I wonder if I can just tell them that it happened in this wreck. And then all of a sudden that's insurance fraud. And so let me ask you this, like, is there such a thing as an honest mistake, and how does that factor into this whole fraud discussion?
So I think that if it's genuinely an honest mistake, it probably doesn't get super far in the investigative stage. I mean, that's the hope anyway. I think I know, but
you have a lot more faith in it than I do.
That's because I worked in it. And what I would say, I mean, I left that office as a managing attorney in the division I was in. And one of the things I would say to the attorneys I was training is that there is so much crime out there. And I wouldn't say this was the policy of the office. I don't want to make any, ascription to the office in any way. But like, you don't have to bend over backwards to hammer somebody who made an honest mistake. There are plenty of folks out there who are doing this as a job.
Who are taking jackhammers to cars and video.
Right? So, I mean, I think in his case it was a sledgehammer and a baseball bat. But either way, the room for the honest mistake is, if it's genuinely an honest mistake, I don't think it gets super far, because it's not because you have a kind-hearted prosecutor, because the prosecutor's like, this is going to be kind of hard to prove. And I will tell you, this is an honest truth about prosecutors' offices. There is a component, and I think they'd be lying to you if any of them told you that they don't do this, where you say, what's it going to look like when I put this in front of a jury? Right? If I'm like, this 75-year-old volunteer at her local animal shelter had defrauded her insurance company of a whopping $600, and you all should be furious with it. Like, I mean, you're going to look like a moron, right? And you're going to look like you're wasting their time. There is a practical breaking. There's a practical sort of freeze on that kind of thing, which I don't think you see in a lot of the rest of the criminal justice system, because things get thrown into that routine that you talked about. And the system is so used to dealing with them that it just becomes like factory line. But with something like this, you need people who know how to charge it. I mean, look, that's not to say you're not going to get a baby DA who's like, oh, insurance fraud, that sounds like something I could specialize in, and they charge it when they shouldn't. You're going to run into stuff like that. But that's where you need a lawyer who's going to be like, look, this is in the realm of an honest mistake, and you're going to look like a monster for putting this person through a trial that you're going to lose.
Yeah. So we've talked about, guns, drugs, all of that stuff, that like Massachusetts has these huge mandatory minimum sentences. It has some of the worst in trafficking drugs in the country, and also guns. If you're facing one of these charges, like, are there mandatory minimums? How likely are you to go to jail for this?
So one of the things that plagues, this is the real taking it out of the abstraction of, like, what does the law say? What does it mean? When you get into court, you put this in front of a superior court judge. They're like, did anyone get stabbed? Did anyone?
Yeah, like, I mean, you put it in front of that judge you were talking about earlier. It's like, I have 2 murderers on my docket. Like, do
you seriously expect me to try this case? And you're like, I don't know, it's a crime. Like, they were indicted by a grand jury. Like, it's this, I didn't do the crime. But honestly, these cases get broomed.
What do you mean by broomed?
They continue without a finding most of the time, which is to those of the audience who aren't familiar with the term, basically a conditional dismissal. You stay out of trouble for a certain period of time. You pay restitution, which is just a whole thing unto itself. The judge will say, look, if you admit that you did this and you stay out of trouble and you pay the money back, we won't convict you.
But I mean, we talked about this earlier, and a continuous out of finding is not a conviction for a lot of purposes, but it is for Immigration, sure. So
in that case, the quaff's not going to help you, probably.
Yeah, so if you're talking about a quaff to insurance fraud, I mean, that's an aggravated felony. Like, you are likely, even if you have a green card, even if you've been here since you were 5, you're likely to have
and I'm
no
not trying
defense.
to be insensitive to that. You asked me if you were going to go to jail.
No. I'm
in
just saying,
America,
like,
in Massachusetts.
That doesn't mean it's not serious. I mean, so what other collateral consequences besides immigration are we talking about here?
So, I mean, I think that the biggest one is going to be that if you do end up, I mean, look, you could get convicted. That's like if the judge is not willing to, for example, you have a record. This is just something that you've been either convicted of in the past or you've gotten quaffs on in the past. The judge is like, look, you're a routine visitor for this particular kind of crime. You're going to plead guilty to it or you're going to get convicted at trial, but I'm not going to let you walk on a quaff. Then you might be looking at jail time. You might be looking at guilty probation. But you asked about collateral consequences, right? Probation is a pretty serious one. You know, I think that we as criminal practitioners will a lot of times be like, it's not jail, right? Just take the probation. Or, you know, I mean, I know that you don't do that. You're like, let's go to trial and fight everything out. And I commend you for that. But like,
they've only got you on video and you confess. Let's go to trial.
You know, and I think, look, there's a lot of merit to fighting, and I recommend it wherever possible. But I think we dismiss probation a lot of times as being like, look, you know, we've had clients where it's like you were facing a 3-year mandatory prison sentence. Probation is a gift. Probation is not light. It's invasive, and
home visits.
Home visits. I wouldn't say Massachusetts. I don't want to comment on New Hampshire necessarily. It's different. It's very different. In New Hampshire, they're like they're more enforcement based, whereas in Mass, they're like judicial, like supervisory. You know, I think that it seems, but that doesn't mean it's going to be good, right? You're going to have a lot of focus on you. And although it's not always guaranteed, I mean, it's up to the judge. If you violate your probation, like this is something a lot of folks understand, you can go be sentenced on the original case. You know, you could bring forward, if it's a quaff or even if it's guilty probation, but they can bring forward the whole thing. And you could start doing time because of a new offense on the old offense. So there are a lot of collateral consequences.
If you stop paying restitution, like you could have this huge restitution. Yeah, and there's the Henry case, and you know, I know you and I have talked about this a lot. What can you tell us? What can you give us in 30 seconds about Henry?
30 seconds? I could tell you the name and how to spell it. No, Henry is the ability to repay, and it is the defendant's obligation to prove by preponderance of the evidence that they do not have the ability to pay, which is I can already tell you it's confounding, right? How am I supposed to prove a negative? And the answer is with evidence. Like, show us your bank accounts, show us that you have no money. Because a lot of times, look, when I was prosecuting these cases, somebody would make off with $150,000 and be like, I don't know what you want from me. I spent it. It's like, okay, do you want to just take your word for it? Because you did just plead guilty to fraud, right? Like, but we're going to believe that the money's all gone. And a Henry hearing is the defendant's obligation to prove it. Now, generally, the judges will make the prosecutor do a lot of that. But if you can prove you don't have any money, then it's like, all right, you owe the government $150,000 at a rate of $50 a month for the next 3 years. You're like, okay, well, that math works out pretty nicely for me.
And then they can't extend your probation for failure to pay if you can't afford it. But you have been on the other side of this and proven that somebody had the ability to pay.
Oh, sure. No, I've prevailed in Henry hearings and I've lost in Henry hearings, but you know what the amazing thing is? We could say this till we're blue in the face. It depends on the judge you get, right? I mean, because some judges do not care. They don't have anything to do with it. They're like, I am not a debt collector. I am a superior court judge, right? Like, get this off of my desk, get this out of my courtroom. Some of the judges are like, look, this guy makes 6 figures. He did steal a bunch of money. A lot of times, Matthew, because we're in this kind of realm of insurance fraud, they want to know if it's an institutional victim. It's the term they use. They'll say, is this an insurance company? Because, like, if it is, who cares? Right? Like, you know, you call general counsel, they're going to be like, how much is it? No, I don't usually pick up the phone for that amount of money. So, but if it's a flesh and blood victim who's been defrauded in some way, which again is going to be a lot less common in a fraud circumstance, but you know, people get defrauded by someone pretending to be a business person. That's probably closer to what you were talking about. And that is going to be defrauded more in like a colloquial sense, because they're going to charge that as embezzlement or larceny by false pretenses. I say we. Yeah. But like, you understand yeah.
And so even though that's true in state court, that people don't generally go to prison for this, in federal court they do. And
oh yeah, the federal sentencing guidelines are very different. And it's
so,
yeah.
I mean, the other thing to think about too is that if you're looking at these sort of fraud offenses, any sort of licensing, professional licensing, that's one of the first things I always ask a client. Do you have any professional licenses? Because like, if you wanted to apply to be a lawyer, a fraud conviction, a fraud quaff would be a death knell to you. Like same thing with like nursing and things like that. So these sort of things, even if you just get a quaff and just get probation, could have serious consequences on your ability to have a career.
I mean, we deal with this almost every day, it seems like, at our firm. You take a felony, it doesn't matter where you move in the United States of America, it's going to be pretty hard for you to get a gun legally. I mean, and a lot of folks, I mean, we talk to people every single day who are like, when I pled guilty to this to avoid jail time, nobody told me I was going to lose my Second Amendment rights for the remainder of my natural life, right? Like, that's a sentence no one explained to me. And it's like, the courts won't overturn convictions for that reason. Like, this is just a lot of this is a serious collateral. Yeah, I mean, certainly, as you point out, it could have professional consequences, but it can also have these personal, like, civil rights consequences, which are tricky. So, it's not a thing to be taken lightly, for sure. Whether or not you're likely to go to jail in state court seems pretty low. Federal court, it's going to depend on the amount of money. You get high enough, you're looking at jail time. So
in the last couple of minutes, I will ask you what they call a badgering question.
Great. Badger the witness.
So I had my home insurance company defraud me, and I can't say what their name is for legal reasons, but had my home insurance company defraud me. Is that insurance fraud, or is that something that I have to go through civil court to deal with?
Yeah, it's going to be civil court. You're going to have a 93A. Unless you could prove that they work the mechanics of what we talked about. Is there an omission or misrepresentation?
Yes, they put a contract in front of me. I signed the contract, they signed the contract, and the terms, they never intended to honor it, let's say.
Yeah,
let's stipulate to that for the sake of this. Yeah. So if it's not, let's stipulate for the sake of argument that it qualifies as insurance fraud according to the statute, right? Mm-hmm. There's an omission to get a material benefit, specifically my premium. If I picked up the phone and called the insurance fraud bureau, would they give me a call back?
I mean, like any good legal answer, it depends, right? Because the problem's going to be who's the named defendant in this case? Is it just going to be the entity? Because then you're going to have to get, like, how can legal fiction, like a corporation or an LLC, form criminal intent?
Well, I mean, you have corporate liability, but I mean, there are also people I talk to on the phone.
Right. No, certainly vicarious corporate liability is a thing I've indicted on before, but that's always vicarious to the person we indict, right? So you indict the person and you indict the business. And there are, like, there are rigorous constraints around that. The clerks hate it because they're like, what on earth is this? Like, what do you mean you indicted their business?
What's the bail for that business? How do you lock up that business if they violate that condition?
Right. The sentencing, you can convict them, but it's like, you can't sentence them to anything. Because here's the thing, man, I will say this, like, if it's a small, let's say with the insurance, let's say it was just like me, and I was like, I'm an insurance company, and I lied to you, and I bilked you out of your money. Honestly, that'd probably more likely be embezzlement or largely by false pretenses.
I mean, like, there was somebody who did that to lawyers recently, a professional insurance, like he was a broker and collected premiums and then never got insurance policies for these lawyers.
Yeah, I can't comment on that for reasons that are probably fairly obvious. But yeah, no, I'm aware of the case. Query the wisdom of stealing from attorneys. Look at the most litigious and obnoxious people on the planet.
Doctors are more litigious and obnoxious. Come on, man.
I mean, we are litigious as part of our jobs, Matthew, but fair enough. No, look, I take your point, and I think that it would be pretty hard to get an insurance company charged with insurance fraud. Your remedies are probably 93A, consumer protection violations.
And that's the thing that bothers me about this whole thing is, like, you have insurance companies who are funding a prosecutor's office to be able to use our state funds and our state resources to prosecute us if we take money from them. But if they take money from us, if they say, hey, we're going to make you jump through a whole bunch of hoops to get your claim paid, or we're going to, not pay for whatever, and we're going to sign these fraudulent policies that don't mean anything, but those people don't get prosecuted. I mean, I've told you from the beginning, if I rob the bank, the criminal court prosecutes me. If the bank robs me, they get a settlement down the road for half of what they took, and the AG's office or, U.S. Attorney's office claims it's a victory, and no one goes to jail. I just think that's...
Well, first correction, I guess, is you said they're using state resources, and I think the funny thing is that where the insurance company's been made to fund this, and that has been the source of some litigation about conflicts of interest. It's like we are making the insurance company shoulder some of the burden for financing
some of the burden, right? But they don't pay your pensions. They don't obviously you're not that anymore, and I'm not.
No, look, I'm not. You know what? I want to make sure I'm clear about this. I think that the failure to prosecute misconduct at the highest levels is probably one of the most corrosive features of our modern democracy. Like, I don't know how the rampant corruption and the rot is allowed to persist in the way that it is. I'm sure that the people who are responsible for it would say that there are pressures that they're not accountable for, but it's crazy to me, the kind of misbehavior that is permitted where the consequences are national, right? But a person who is doing petty crime is going to get clobbered for the rest of their life. Like, I don't think that doesn't seem like justice to me. It just doesn't.
Yeah. I mean, I don't want to get political here, but like 2008 housing crisis, no one went to jail. Like all of this stuff, like they get bailouts.
One person went to jail. But anyway, no, certainly not enough people went to jail for melting the global economy. I'm with you on that one.
So let's get off of our soapbox for a minute here. Somebody is facing one of these charges. If someone is, thinks they may have done something like this, what should they do?
So, I mean, look, you can call an attorney and say, what's my exposure? And you talk to the right person. I mean, but
if they talk to you, then that would be protected by attorney-client privilege, right?
Yeah, under the right circumstances, don't shout it at me across a crowded parking lot. But if we engage in a consult, it's going to be covered. I'm not going to help you find ways to hide evidence or get away with it, but I would be happy to explain what your exposure is based on the kind of stuff I already talked about. Like, I know what they're going to look for. I know what would be usable evidence against you. A lot of times people just don't know what's out there. Like the thing about the car. I don't know if that seemed like it surprised you. The idea that your good driver discount might be used against you if you accidentally commit insurance fraud.
I mean, I see the commercials and I'm like, oh, that sounds great. I'm a good driver. Like everyone thinks they're a good driver.
Right? And I'm not saying that that's exactly. Maybe look, an insurance company come after me like we never use it for investigative purposes. What do I know? I'm just saying that this is the information I'd go after if I were investigating.
But even if it's not for investigative purposes, it's still not protected from a grand jury subpoena.
For sure, yeah.
If they're like, well, we don't use it for that reason. It's like, oh, but if we tell the AG's office or the U.S. Attorney's office, then
yeah. So what did we miss? I think that. Yeah, if you're worried, if you have a genuine concern that you may have done something like this, and you're like recently, and you're kind of like, what kind of trouble am I in? You can call and talk to somebody who will explain to you if they know what they're talking about. Like, yeah, this is, and how worried should you be? I mean, a lot of it's gonna be speculative, right? Like, I don't know if you're gonna have caught anybody's attention. Is this the first time you've done this? Is it like for like a couple $100? Like, I don't, versus if this is a lifestyle and it's in the six figures. Like, now you got to worry, maybe used to be the feds wouldn't pay attention to something that was that size, but who knows? Should you be worried about accidentally doing this in the future? Don't live your life that way. But like, what constantly I come back to with stuff like fraud is like, if you're worried, maybe there's a good reason for that, right? If you're like, I got a great way to save money on insurance, just lie. Like, sure. But, and if you're worried, if you're like, look, I'm going to be making this, we didn't even talk about mortgage fraud. Buckle in, Matthew, for another hour.
Oh my God.
No. So again,
mortgage fraud. What?
Yeah, we're not going to get into mortgage fraud.
Yeah, we're not going to get into, we'll do another podcast about mortgage fraud, I guess.
It's right. Title fraud, I prosecuted title fraud when I was in New Hampshire. It's a whole, they don't like it when you lie about stuff, man, and you get money for it. Like, it's the criminalization of, I didn't call it this at the top of the hour. Maybe I should have. It's like the criminalization of lying, right? We would normally think of that as perjury, but like perjury is a whole different weird thing.
Oh,
but
God,
fraud, fraud is probably way more. I could guarantee you fraud is more common, at least as charge, than perjury. Yeah, I would say that, don't be thrown off by the term and how abstract it sounds. There are people who know how to deal with this kind of thing. You just got to find them.
Yeah, and it sounds like there are very specific attorneys who know how to deal with this. And if you just call your uncle's buddy who went to law school, he may not know what to do with this. He may take your money and he may tell you to plead guilty, but you may have a defense to it.
Right.
He may not want to.
That's exactly right. And you
may
might
not want to
trust your
shell out
uncle.
the money for that 2 terabyte hard drive to give to the DA's office, and much less review it.
Yeah,
But
you know, you may trust your Uncle Ricky's lawyer, but you know, if he doesn't know what he's doing, this is your future, right? It's your defend your innocence, right? You got to make sure you got the right people fighting for you. Yeah, I think that's probably a good place to end.
So what did we miss here? If there's some question you have, guys, just comment it below. And if there's something you want to know more about, and we do have blogs on our website about this, we'll try to link to some of them. But if there's other questions, feel free to shoot us a comment below or anything like that. And thanks for coming on, Chris. This has been surprisingly interesting, is what I will say.
I'm very happy and only a little offended to hear you say it that way. I appreciate you having me on, Matthew. I, as you know, love to talk about these things endlessly. So thanks for giving me the platform to do that. And I look forward to the next podcast.
Yeah, it's been great. Thanks, Chris.